It's Joe,
Hey, it's Autumn.
and we're getting into Scholarship Week as we pull into the end of DigPINS. Um, so what have we got on tap, Autumn?
Well, I'm really excited about this week. This is actually my favorite week of DigPINS. I've done it, the last time I did it, I actually swapped the order and I did pedagogy, I did scholarship and then I did pedagogy. And doing it this way, I don't think it's going to matter too much. I think they work so well, so nicely together. It doesn't really matter which one comes first necessarily. Um, But I feel like this is an important one, and I feel like it's one that is a little bit easier for faculty to engage with, both the pedagogy and the scholarship, because now, I mean, we're really getting into the meat of their identity, right? Like, who are you as a scholar? What are you interested in? What are you researching? What are some of the things that's going on? And I guess I want to talk a little bit because we do have a couple of staff members who aren't faculty. So, if that's the case, if you're in the scholarship week and you don't have a discipline that is, has a requirement of scholarship on you, I think it's still the same fundamental questions, right? What are you researching? What is your field? What are you passionate about? What is your work? And how do you contribute to that work? How do you further that work within your field? And how do you keep yourself up to date about the changes in your field? So I feel like either way, whether you're faculty or whether you're staff, it's still the same fundamental questions. But faculty, of course, just have a more of a requirement for that kind of work.
Well, and I think there's a neat question there about who's your audience and who's your potential audience. It's very easy to say my audience are the other people who do the work in my subfield, and of course that's a vital audience for scholarship. And at the same time, I think there's some interesting questions about what role you want in communicating the work that you do, even just with your friend circle. But also in attracting new members of the field towards your subfield, perhaps, or at least making sure they understand the relevance of the work that you're doing. And to what extent, does your work say something that's important for a social issue, a policy debate, general cultural input? And I think that's one of the other interesting questions that our research, our articles this week look at different ways to make sure that your work, or the work that's relevant to you, is in the world in a findable and accessible way, where accessible means both that the thing itself can be accessed, but also that the concepts in it can be accessed.
Because I think that's that's like the big thing that the digital gives us, right? It allows us to take down those barriers to access in lots of different cool and interesting ways. So there's just the fact that we don't need to publish a print journal, and we can save money with that, right? And that we can put things online and disseminate things wider is one piece. But, the other piece, one of the examples that I love so much in this week's content that we have is some of the work that George Vestellanos and Laura Pasquini are doing with taking some research that they're doing and then making a video about that research. And that explains the methodology and explains the discussion. And then there's a link to the more complex article, in the discussion side of the, or in the description of the video. And so if you want the nitty gritty and you want those details and you want to dig in deeper, you can do that. But, it's so much more accessible to the general public as this little video to just kind of get the main points out.
And the podcast itself is also it's a little meta, but that's also a way of saying, and there are a bunch of these podcasts in higher ed and in the disciplines, and they're terrific, but they all kind of boil down to, thanks for your wonderful career of work and this wonderful new book or set of articles that you've put out there. Can you give me the half-hour version? And can we have a conversation about it? So I think, that's another, if you don't want to take the time to listen to the podcast, although I respect the gift of voice and think that it's worth taking the time, but there is a transcript linked. So that's another way of making the research out there and reaching another audience that otherwise might not have been aware. So that's a neat way of looking at it. We've got the blog from Bonnie Stewart that does a very similar thing. It talks about, here's the process by which I put this article together, and now it's released. And again, here's the link, but here are the high points of the context you should know about how and why this article got written the way it did, which is a fascinating contribution to the conversation. And then we've also got an article about using your institutional repository, Digital Kenyon at Kenyon, the Digital Commons at SNC, is that right?
Yep.
And some neat research that, so this is stuff I studied in grad school, so I'm kind of geeking out about it. And I know that most of you did not go to library science grad school. So I will say that if you reach the point where you're looking at some of the metrics for the way that articles are cited and saying, I'm kind of glazing over here, that's okay. It's not a novel. You can skip from the introduction to the conclusion. But I think it's worth being aware that making sure that your research gets archived in these open and accessible formats does appear to have real impact on the longevity of those articles and people's ability to keep using them and keep citing you, which is nice, but keep knowing your ideas, which is why we actually did it. So there's a couple of neat articles there.
I'm really excited. We also have a couple of activities that are going to be very exciting. So last week we did a hypothesis annotation of Karen Cagliosi's, but you can't do that in a STEM course. And the last time I looked, we had 58 annotations on that, which actually there are 58 total. So it's not 58 like top level annotations. I forget how many are there, but that's including all of the replies and everything else, which I think was a great introduction to a new tool that a lot of people don't know about, but that I think is a really powerful tool, as well as introducing folks to Karen. So we're actually going to get Karen on the line, and we're going to have a synchronous call with her. That will be live streamed and recorded. And then the other thing that we have is we'd like all of you to go out and find an article in your discipline that is digital and open and accessible, and share that with us. Put that on Twitter, put that into the back channel, however it is that you feel comfortable sharing that. Let's talk a little bit about what we mean by article, Joe.
Sure. So, certainly, as teachers of primarily undergrads, you may have some things that right off you can go to. Here's a good example of the kind of thing that I expect an intro or intermediate level student to be able to read in this article. And at that point, it would basically be a process of making sure that how physically accessible that text is through the internet. Is it something that has to live behind the LMS, or can you give it out more widely? But I think it's also worth saying that there are a lot of other ways that people are putting research in the world in ways that are intellectually accessible. So we hinted at this idea that there are these terrific YouTube videos that distill concepts for active research down into these easier to understand and digest chunks. That might be an example. There might be blog posts or Twitter streams or other. I'm sorry?
Videos.
Yeah, so there might be any number of interesting ways in which you can say, this takes a reasonably active area of research and lets people know that it exists and what it says. So if I guess we're just saying, think broadly about the things that you like to drive people to when your friends say, "Help me understand what's happening in your discipline." Think broadly about what seems to work when you introduce them to those things. And the point is for you to spend a little reflective time on where you might want to spend your time making your own work more accessible and available. And we can have that conversation on the blog or on Twitter or on the back channel to say how realistic is it that I might do something like this, and what kind of resources do Joe and Autumn have to help me get it done?
Absolutely.
What kind of expertise might I have or want to build in my department to make this part of our campus culture?
So 3 readings, 2 activities. Of course, the continued conversation on the blog and Slack and in Moodle, our back channels. And then that's it.
Yeah.
Last week.
Yep. Now, I guess one thing to think about is that we can leave these back channels up and running. The plan is for the blogs to stay up and running. If that's someplace where, particularly if there's something that you haven't addressed, but I have a brain full of like half-written blog posts. So, if you have found yourself catching that from me, it's still up and you can put it out there, and we will, it'll be something where I will try to keep an eye on that. I've put it into my RSS reader, so I'll see it and try to comment.
I will mention that probably come January, I will archive my blog because I'll be running DigPINS again for J-term, hopefully. That's the plan anyway. And I like to start fresh with the blog because things change. So I'll probably archive that off to a different site. The Slack that we have as our back channel is actually the same Slack that we've had since the very first run of DigPINS. So somebody actually asked me, like, I see some other people in there from a while ago. Are they in there? And I was like, well, they might be, but they're probably not paying attention to it. So somebody can still be part of a Slack team, but uninstall Slack and not visit Slack, and they wouldn't realize that there's still stuff going on because they're just not paying attention to it. But we do have, I think, 30 people in that Slack now, so something like that.
So yeah, and there'll still be a DigPINS hashtag over on Twitter. You may see it, it might pop up from time to time in Hypothesis or on a blog, and that is a place where we will always value your contributions. I think that's part of this workshop in terms of getting people in a comfortable network is that should you notice somebody, we hope you'll say hi, and contribute. Yeah, so we're wrapping up. I think it's a good if you're looking for prompts for blog posts. This is the scholarship week, and thinking about how you put your professional activity out there in the world is the big prompt. But you might also want to just spend a little time reflecting over the whole experience and thinking about what's my logical next step? What's the most comfortable? What looks the most productive? Where might I want to be? So that's another thing that you might want to think about as we wrap up.
I'm a little sad.
Me too. This has been fun. I've really enjoyed seeing everybody's wonderful thoughts and discussions. Meeting a whole bunch of St. Norbert's people that I didn't know at all, getting to know some Kenyon people better, and seeing everybody take some risks. And I think it's worth honoring that folks stretched and tried some new things out and made time for something new in their life. And we thank you for that, because it's an honor that you allowed us to be part of it. Yeah,
it was a really wonderful experience. It was great to get to be introduced to some Kenyan people and get to know some St. Norbert people a little bit more. I think it's a great experience, and I just want to thank everybody for their participation and their thoughts and their reflections. It's been great.
So I guess that's it. We will see you on the live call on Thursday. Is that right?
I believe it's Thursday. Yeah.
It'll be in the blog post.
Yes, it will.
The blog post will be right.
Get it wrong in the video. We're gonna have to record the whole video over again.
We'll just put a little subtitle in there. Joe's a dope.
Right?
I should have a button that just puts Joe's the dope on the screen. But yeah, we'll see you there. We'll see you in the various communication channels. And thanks so much. It's going to be a great week.
Thank you, everyone.